Get out. You're ruining my son's christening. My son said it clearly, not in a whisper, not under his breath, clearly. And I was holding my grandson when he said it. The church was full that morning. White lilies framed the altar. The stained glass windows scattered muted blues and reds across the polished wood pews. My grandson, Jacob, was wrapped in a thin white blanket that Margaret had sewn before she passed. I had kept it carefully folded in the cedar chest in our bedroom. It was 11:23 a.m. when Father Daniels lifted the silver bowl and began the blessing. I was standing just behind my son and his wife, Lauren, holding Jacob so they could adjust the camera angle for photographs. Lauren turned slightly and glanced at the ring around my neck. Margaret's ring. Simple gold band, worn smooth after 42 years. I'd taken it from her finger the night she died and threaded it onto a thin chain. I hadn't taken it off since. "You're wearing it again," Lauren whispered. "I always am," I said. She didn't respond. Her eyes narrowed briefly. The ceremony continued. When Father Daniels invited the family to gather closer, I stepped forward instinctively. Jacob stirred in my arms, his small fingers curling against the sleeve of my jacket. Lauren's voice cut through the quiet. Maybe he shouldn't hold him. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Father Daniels paused. My son turned toward her. "What?" Lauren forced a polite smile. "I just think it's a lot for him, with his memory and all." My memory. I felt the weight of Jacob shift slightly in my arms. "I'm fine," I said calmly. Lauren's tone sharpened. "You forgot to pick up the dry cleaning last week." The dry cleaning. That was her evidence. "I remembered the next morning," I replied. Father Daniels cleared his throat gently. "Is everything all right?" Lauren stepped closer. "I just don't want anything happening during the baptism," she said. There it was. Concern disguised as caution. I adjusted my hold on Jacob, steady, controlled. "I've raised 2 children," I said quietly. Lauren didn't smile this time. "That was a long time ago." My son looked between us. "Dad, maybe just step back a little." The words were small, but they landed heavier than the lilies at the altar. "Are you asking me to move?" I asked. Lauren answered instead. "He's too senile to keep that ring, and he's not steady enough to hold the baby." The word senile drifted through the sanctuary like smoke. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in the pews. Someone coughed. Someone whispered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tighten my grip. I didn't correct her. I simply looked at my son. And that was when he said it. "Get out. You're ruining my son's christening." The silence that followed was complete. Even the baby stopped fussing. I stood there, still holding Jacob. My son's jaw was tight. Lauren's chin was lifted slightly. Father Daniels waited. "Give him to me," Lauren said softly. I handed Jacob back carefully. Not because I agreed. Because the child deserved calm. I stepped back. Then I stepped away. I didn't slam a door. I didn't argue in the vestibule. I didn't demand respect. I walked out into the cool morning air and stood beside my car. The church doors closed behind me. Humiliation is loud inside a room. Outside, it feels quieter, colder. I looked down at Margaret's ring. It caught the sunlight briefly. "He's too senile. You're ruining it. Get out." Those words were not about a ceremony. They were about position. I drove home alone. The house was quiet. Margaret's photograph still rested on the mantel. The oak tree in the front yard swayed slightly in the wind. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, indifferent to what had just happened. I poured a glass of water and sat at the dining table. It was the same table, where I had paid tuition bills, where I had helped my son with algebra homework, where Margaret and I had argued about paint colors and reconciled before bed. At 1:07 p.m., my phone vibrated. It was my son. I let it ring twice before answering. "What?" he said. "That's not how you start a conversation," I replied calmly. "You embarrassed us." "In what way?" "You made it awkward. You told me to leave. You were causing tension." I was holding my grandson. "Silence. You've been forgetting things," he said finally. "Name one financial obligation I've missed." "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point." He exhaled sharply. "Lauren's just worried." "About what?" "About you slipping." "I slipped once on the driveway ice." "You could have dropped him." "I didn't." Silence again. There is a moment when an accusation requires evidence. He had none. "Dad, just don't come to dinner tonight," he said. I wasn't planning to. The line went dead. I set the phone down. The narrative was forming. Concern, memory, safety, stability. I knew the pattern. I had seen it happen to others. One fall becomes a story. One forgotten errand becomes decline. Decline becomes incompetence. Incompetence becomes control. I stood up and walked to the study. The black binder was exactly where I left it. Inside were copies of the Lawson Family Trust, executed in 2003, property deed, insurance policies, investment accounts, a clear, structured estate plan that Margaret and I had drafted deliberately. There was a clause in that trust that few people besides Elaine knew about. Margaret had insisted on it. "If anyone ever questions your judgment," she had said, "make sure there's a record that can't be rewritten." I opened to that page. The ink was still sharp. I closed the binder slowly. At 4:32 p.m., Lauren posted photographs from the christening online. In every image, I was cropped out. Caption: "A perfect day with the people who matter most." I didn't react publicly. Reaction feeds narrative. Documentation interrupts it. At 6:18 p.m., my daughter-in-law sent a text. "We need to talk about the ring." I stared at the message. The ring wasn't jewelry. It was leverage. If I gave it up under pressure, the pattern would continue. If I defended it emotionally, the narrative would escalate. Instead, I replied simply, "Come by tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. No explanation. No argument. Because tomorrow, I intended to move the conversation from sanctuary whispers to structured clarity. And I had a feeling that when they saw what Margaret and I had prepared years ago, the word senile would not be the one hanging in the air. At 8:57 a.m., they were already in the driveway. Lauren stepped out of the passenger seat first, sunglasses on, shoulders squared. My son followed, phone in hand, as if prepared to record or reference something. I opened the door before they rang the bell. "You said 9, Lauren noted. "It is," I replied. "You're early." We sat at the dining table. No coffee, no pleasantries. The ring rested against my chest, under the collar of my shirt. "About the ring," Lauren began. "Yes. It belongs in a safe. Or with us, you shouldn't be wearing it." "Why?" "Because you're not stable." "Define unstable." She hesitated. "You're forgetting things. You left the stove on last week." "I turned it off. You arrived before the burner cooled." My son shifted. "Dad, this isn't about one thing." "No," I agreed. "It's about a pattern." "That's what we're saying," Lauren replied quickly. Yes, I said calmly. It is. I reached for the black binder. Lauren's eyes narrowed. This isn't about legal documents. It is, I replied. I opened to the section Margaret, and I had drafted after her diagnosis. Article 7, Heirloom Allocation and Conditional Distribution. Margaret had been specific. The wedding band was to remain in my possession until my death, not earlier, not conditionally, not based on opinion. Upon my death, it would be placed in trust for Jacob until age 25. Lauren leaned forward. 25, she read. Yes. That's ridiculous. It's deliberate. My son read the clause again. You planned this years ago. Yes. For this. For clarity. Lauren folded her arms. So we just wait. You live, I corrected. Silence. There's also this, I said, turning another page. Article 9, Capacity Verification Protocol. If any beneficiary sought to challenge the trustee's mental competence, 2 independent neurologists must certify impairment before any temporary authority could be considered. Lauren blinked. You expected this? No, I said quietly. I prepared for it. Preparation is not paranoia. It is structure. My son leaned back in his chair. You think we're trying to declare you incompetent? You've already begun. Lauren's jaw tightened. We were protecting Jacob. From what? From instability. I have not missed a mortgage payment. I have not defaulted on insurance. I have not mismanaged investments. That's not what senility looks like at first, she said. The word again. I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen. I returned with a printed document. Dr. Patel's cognitive evaluation from 6 months ago. Score well within normal parameters. Executive functioning intact. Financial reasoning strong. I asked for this myself, I said. Lauren stared at it. You went to a doctor. Yes. Because of us. Because I understand narrative. My son looked embarrassed. Dad, if you believe I am declining, test me properly. Don't whisper. Silence. Lauren glanced at my son. We just don't want something to happen suddenly. It will, I said, eventually. That's cruel. It's factual. I touched the ring through my shirt. You're not protecting Jacob from instability, I continued. You're protecting yourselves from uncertainty. The room went still. My son looked at the table. Lauren didn't speak. You think if you secure the ring, you secure the future, I said gently. You don't. Lauren's voice softened slightly. I just don't want chaos. Chaos begins when assumption replaces clarity. That sentence landed differently. My son exhaled. You always do this, he said. Do what? Stay calm. That's not manipulation, I replied. It's control. Of us. Of myself. There is a difference. Lauren leaned back slowly. So what happens now? Nothing, I said. Nothing. You attend family dinners. You raise your son. I remain in control of what I built. And the ring. It remains where it is. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because there was no legal angle left to argue. The structure was tight. The documentation was current. The narrative was exposed. They left at 9:43 a.m. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just measured footsteps. At 11:02 a.m., I received a text from Lauren. We weren't trying to humiliate you. I didn't reply. At 1:15 p.m., another text arrived. I'm sorry for saying that in church. I stared at it for a long moment. Apology without acknowledgement is incomplete. I typed one sentence. Fear does not justify disrespect. She didn't respond. That evening, I walked to the backyard and sat beneath the oak tree. Margaret had planted it the year Jacob was born. You always said they'd push, she had told me once, half joking. Push what? Timeline. She had been right. The next escalation didn't come from Lauren. It came from someone else. At 6:27 p.m., the phone rang. Mr. Lawson, a woman's voice asked. Yes. This is an intake coordinator from Willowbrook Assisted Living. We received an inquiry about availability for you. I didn't speak immediately. Who made the inquiry? I asked calmly. Your daughter-in-law. There it was. The next lever. From ring to competence to assisted living. The progression was not emotional. It was strategic. I thanked the coordinator and ended the call. Then I opened the binder again. Article 7. Article 9. The trust was intact. But I understood something clearly now. This wasn't about jewelry. It wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't even about inheritance. It was about repositioning me gradually. From trustee to transitional. And I had no intention of allowing that shift. Because once someone moves you out of your own authority, they do not move you back. The question now was not whether they would push further. It was how far. And I intended to be ahead of it. The assisted living inquiry did not surprise me. It confirmed the pattern. First the ring, then my judgment, now my residence. Repositioning is rarely abrupt. It's incremental. At 9:00 a.m. the following morning, I called Willowbrook back. This is Thomas Lawson, returning your call. Mr. Lawson, the coordinator replied gently, we received a preliminary interest form regarding possible transition planning. I did not submit that. We understand. We were told there were concerns about your safety living alone. I see. Silence. If there are concerns, she continued, we would require a medical assessment and family consultation. Noted, I said calmly. And you are not interested at this time? No. I hung up and opened the binder again. It wasn't paranoia. It was progression. Lauren had attempted social pressure. Then medical doubt, now residential transition. The next step would be legal. So I moved first. At 11:12 a.m., I was seated in Elaine's office. They contacted assisted living, she asked. Yes. Then we formalize residency authority. How? An affidavit of independent living. It sounded clinical. But clarity is clinical. We drafted a notarized affidavit stating that I was fully capable of independent living, supported by recent medical evaluation and financial management records. I want it filed, I said. With the county. Yes. Done. Paper does not argue. It anchors. That afternoon, I invited Daniel to lunch. Not Lauren. Just him. We sat in a quiet diner on Maple Street. You contacted assisted living, I said without preface. He blinked. She did. And you. I didn't stop it. That's not neutrality. He looked tired. She's afraid. Of what? Of waking up one day and finding you on the floor. And so the solution is to remove me preemptively. She thinks so. What do you think? He didn't answer immediately. I think we're moving too fast, he said finally. That mattered. You're not losing me, I said. It feels like we are. I studied his face. When did you start counting down? I asked quietly. He looked away. After Mom died. There it was. Grief disguised as urgency. You think controlling the timeline prevents loss, I said. Yes. It doesn't. He nodded slowly. I know. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. But it was real. That evening, Lauren came by unannounced. She stood at the doorway, hesitant. I shouldn't have contacted Willowbrook, she said. No. I panicked. Yes. I thought if we secured a spot, we'd be prepared. Prepared for what? For collapse. Collapse of what? She swallowed. Everything. The fear was larger than I had assumed. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about jewelry. It was about control over unpredictability. I am not collapsing, I said calmly. I know. But you're planning for it. She nodded. I'm sorry. The apology was quieter this time. Less defensive. More reflective. I handed her a copy of the affidavit of independent living. She read it slowly. You filed this. Yes. Why? Because clarity reduces panic. She sat down. I didn't mean to disrespect you. You did. I know. There was no argument left. Just acknowledgement. The next day, something happened that neither of us expected. Dr. Patel called. Thomas, he said, I received another inquiry. From a different law office. The escalation had not stopped. It had shifted. They're asking about long-term cognitive trajectory, he said carefully. Do not release anything, I replied. Of course not. I drove to Elaine immediately. This is layered, she said after reading the new correspondence. They're testing multiple angles. Yes. What do? We formalize trustee reinforcement. Within hours, we drafted a public notice reaffirming sole trustee authority and filed it with the county. Elaine also sent a cease and desist letter to the law firm. The tone was measured. Professional. Firm. By Friday, the law office withdrew its inquiry. Not because of emotion. Because of documentation. Lauren came into the study that evening. I didn't know it went that far, she said. It did. I wasn't trying to replace you. You were trying to protect yourself. She nodded. Yes. Protection without consent becomes control, I said. She looked at the ring. I was wrong about that too. Yes. The room was quiet. No raised voices. No accusations. Just acknowledgement. The assisted living inquiry stopped. The legal letters stopped. The medical probes stopped. Not because they were confronted with anger. Because they were met with structure. On Sunday, Daniel brought Jacob over. Can you hold him? He asked. Yes. I took my grandson in my arms. The ring rested against my chest. Lauren watched carefully. Not nervously. Thoughtfully. Emma toddled over and pointed at the chain. Ring, she said. Yes, I smiled. Lauren stepped closer. You're not too senile, she said quietly. No. I was afraid. Yes. I'm sorry. The apology this time was complete. Specific. Unqualified. That's when reconciliation begins. Not when accusations stop. When fear is named honestly. I looked at Jacob sleeping against my shoulder. The house was still mine. The trust was still intact. The ring was still where it belonged. And the timeline was still present tense. But something else had changed. They were no longer preparing for my absence. They were standing in my presence. And that difference reshapes everything. The house felt different after that. Not because anything had been sold, not because any papers had changed hands, because something invisible had shifted. Lauren stopped asking about assisted living. She stopped mentioning what-if scenarios. The language changed first. "Would you like help with the yard?" she asked one afternoon. "Yes," I replied. "Would you like me to take Jacob for an hour?" "No." And that was accepted. No tension, no persuasion. Consent restored balance. One evening in early spring, Daniel and I sat on the back porch while the sun dropped behind the oak tree. "I didn't realize how much I was pushing," he said. "You weren't pushing," I replied. "You were rushing." "That's worse." "Sometimes." He looked at the ring around my neck. "I thought that if we secured things early, it would make us feel stable." "Did it?" "No. Because stability isn't possession." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." Lauren joined us a few minutes later. "I was afraid of losing control," she admitted. "You never had it," I said gently. "That's the problem," she replied. There it was. Not greed. Not malice. Control. Control feels like safety to people who have lived without it. I understood that. But understanding does not require surrender. "I don't want to move you forward anymore," she said quietly. "Good. I don't want to treat you like you're already gone." "I'm not." The words hung in the air. Not heavy. Just steady. In April, I met with Elaine one final time. Not to defend. To reinforce. "I want to add one more clause," I said. "What kind?" she asked. "Communication requirement." We drafted a simple addition. Any future discussion of asset transfer, residency change, or power of attorney must originate from me in writing, not from speculation, not from urgency. Elaine looked at me carefully. "You're not punishing them," she said. "No. You're preventing fear from becoming momentum." "Yes." She nodded. "That's wise." When I showed the amendment to Daniel and Lauren, they read it without resistance. "That's fair," Lauren said. Fair. That word returned often now. It had been absent at the christening. Now it was present. Summer came. The house felt like a home again. Jacob crawled across the living room rug. Emma toddled after him. Lauren laughed in the kitchen. Daniel grilled in the backyard. The garage no longer felt like a staging area. It felt like a garage. One evening, Lauren approached me while I was watering the garden. "I need to say something clearly," she said. "I'm listening. I was wrong to call you senile." "Yes." I was scared, and I used that word because it gave me leverage. I nodded. "That's honest. I won't do that again." "I believe you." Belief is not automatic. It is rebuilt. In small, repeated moments. Later that week, Daniel brought me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. "An inventory of our own finances," he said. "I thought we should start managing our stability instead of trying to manage yours." I smiled faintly. "That's progress." He laughed softly. "I guess it is." There are moments in family life when the shift is quiet but permanent. Not because of a speech. Not because of a confrontation. Because perspective changes. The ring remains around my neck. Not because I cling to it. Because it belongs to the present. One afternoon, Emma asked, "Grandpa, why do you wear that?" "Because it reminds me of your grandmother," I said. Lauren was standing nearby. She didn't interrupt. She didn't suggest safekeeping. She simply listened. That's growth. At the next christening, this time for a cousin's child, the atmosphere was different. No whispers. No commentary about memory. No urgency. When the priest invited the family forward, Lauren stepped back slightly. "Go ahead," she said to me. I held Jacob gently. Steady. Present. The difference wasn't legal. It was relational. If you've ever had someone question your competence in front of others, you know how sharp that moment can feel. But the sharper moment is deciding how to respond. You can shout. You can retaliate. Or you can document. You can steady. You can clarify. And then you can wait. Fear burns quickly. Structure endures. Lauren was not my enemy. She was afraid. Daniel was not greedy. He was uncertain. Fear and uncertainty, when left unchecked, look like control. When confronted calmly, they become understanding. I did not win. There was no victory speech. There was steadiness. And steadiness is stronger than volume. If someone tells you you're too senile to hold your own life, ask yourself one question. Is that accusation rooted in evidence or in fear? And if it's fear, respond with clarity. Paper. Structure. Calm. Because dignity doesn't shout. It stands. And when you stand long enough, the noise quiets itself.